So since we said we were going to be talking about communicating science and the science of communications, I think if it's Thursday, it must be Friday, Science Friday. Danielle Dana is going to tell us how for 30 years, right? They've been telling science stories very effectively with a national audience.
Hello. Admittedly, we have had a whole bunch of wonderful conversations today, and this is a hard act to follow. Fortunately for me, a lot of what has been discussed already here today is stuff that I will be talking about. I will begin by telling you what we're going to talk about today is about how Science Friday is changing the narrative for how we communicate, think, and reach audiences with science, and particularly with science media. If you are not already familiar with Science Friday, I'm guessing a number of you already are. I don't mind bragging about it. Science Friday is predominantly known as a radio program, but in recent years has really branched beyond radio to have a strong media presence and extend our reach beyond radio. And just to satisfy all of the groupies out there,
I'm Ira Plato. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
It's the end of the day. I'm going to insert a lot of media into this to keep you entertained. So Science Friday has a 27-year of broadcasting on the radio with interviews with experts about a variety of science topics. And what we do best is distilling this information for public consumption. So let's take a quick look at our audience. So this is the weekly radio program. We have 1.8 million people that are tuning into Science Friday every week for the live show. This changes a little bit with podcasters, and this is also not a complete audience. We are on over 400 stations in all of the top media markets. And this is a pretty awesome accomplishment, but it's not enough for us. We want to reach beyond media because we want to have broad discussions about science, and we can't just do that with one medium like radio. So that brings me to the radio show. The radio broadcast talks with experts on the air, but roughly 104 hours of those conversations. That's a lot of information that we are trying to distill. And I'm going to play a segment for you so you can hear a little bit about what we've been doing.
Did this ice cream sandwich really melt, or not melt?
You know, the ice cream sandwich actually melted. I haven't heard of anyone at high temperatures that they can have ice not melt. So the ice definitely melted, so therefore the ice cream melted. But the structure itself did not collapse, which is really, really, really cool, to say the least.
Why is that so cool?
So basically in ice cream, you have a couple different parts. You have your ice crystals, of course, which melt. You have your air cells. So picture kind of like a soda with like little bubbles around it. That would be kind of like your air cells in ice cream dispersed throughout your ice cream. And you also have your fat globules. And sometimes usually those fat globules are partially coalesced. They kind of agglomerate together, but they're not fully coalesced like butter, but they're held together through a partial crystalline network, which causes them to sometimes be really, really large in size. And that, along with the air structure, sometimes causes ice cream not to collapse from natural gravitational force. And so what that mom probably mostly encountered was the water, basically the ice that turned into water, but if it was outside, it probably evaporated off at some point. And what was left there was basically kind of like a foam that consisted of your fat globules, your air cells, and some of the, probably a couple of sugars and some of the other ingredients in ice cream. So it actually did melt.
Now, this is a fun segment, and the timing's right as we're finally approaching summer, so I thought that I would share that with you. And just to get this question out of the way for later, yes, there is such a thing as being an ice cream scientist, as Maya Warren is. So you can really do anything with science. The interesting thing about this is this story actually in this interview came from a national media craze generated by a woman in Cincinnati, a mother in Cincinnati, that was shocked when she found her child's ice cream sitting outside and remained unmelted after being out for 24 hours in a warm climate. What's interesting about that is how Science Friday uses that to connect science to everyday life. And using news as context for making those connections is an important part of what Science Friday is doing. In an ideal world, scientists and researchers are able to openly communicate what they are doing in a way that is understandable to a lay audience in plain language. Unfortunately, we know that that is not all that easy to do and not all that common. So media and journalism play a very important role in fueling these conversations and translating scientific concepts to the public. So if done correctly, I think everybody in this room knows that media can play an important role. It can extend beyond teaching. It can fuel curiosity, facilitate conversations, and help people make better decisions. In 27 years of broadcasting Science Friday, we have learned some things about how we create content using the radio broadcast as our approach, and using the same approach into all of the other media that we have extended beyond radio. The first one I just touched upon is creating context. Science Friday uses news to do this. It's a really great way of kind of connecting people to the science happening in their everyday life, and this can be broadened. Good communications are key. Make sure that you are employing people that can tell effective stories. Make sure that you are bringing great guests onto the air. Two-way conversations are something unique that Science Friday is doing, and I think it really has helped us reach new audiences. We find ways to connect scientists to the public and make them a part of that dialogue so that it's not so one-sided. We always consider what is relevant and meaningful to our audience. If you're talking to a group of people that have different educational backgrounds, geographies, and interests, you want to make sure that what you are talking about is relevant to them. Seize moments of learning. So basically, we all know that these things exist. There are great scientific events happening out there. There are cultural moments. There are historic moments. There are all these amazing opportunities, films, art, theater, music, where we can talk about, use them as learning opportunities to connect people to things happening in everyday life. Reach out. This simply means go after your audience. Don't wait for them to come to you. They won't always find you. It's really important that you're reaching people with the content that you have and not waiting for them to come to you. And finally, low barriers to entry. It's been very important to Science Friday. It's a little bit easier because we are public media, but we work very hard to make sure that all of our content is free and that there are no barriers other than internet and radio for people to pay attention to what it is that we're doing. Just so you know that this actually works, this is our audience. You've already been exposed to the fact that we're reaching over 2 million people with the radio program every week. But in addition to that, we have over 2 million people, the largest social following of any public radio program on social. We are reaching over 300,000 people as uniquely visiting the Science Friday site. That used to say educate. With our educational tools, we are reaching over 1.2 million people that are going to our education pages and activities by themselves. In video, we have over 300,000 regular video subscribers, and our videos have received over 1 million views collectively. So we definitely know what we're talking about. So I promise I will not stay on this slide for very long. I don't want to gross anybody out. So our first venture beyond radio was actually into video. So basically taking the storytelling that we were already doing and translating that into a visual medium. So it not only provided us with opportunities to tell a different story other than the ones we were creating on radio, but it allowed us to reach a different audience. So part of that, some people are inclined to look at things through pictures and learn science through pictures. So that was an easy way for us to venture out and reach new audiences. One of the things that we did keep in mind was our news relevancy and trying to make sure that storytelling was a key part of our deliverables. Basically put, the value of what we were offering was exactly the same. The medium and distribution were different. Currently, Science Friday is making around 50 videos a year. And we have, as I said, over 300,000 video subscribers to those videos. The topics range. We are talking about food science. We are talking about cephalopods. We are talking about engineering recycling plants. The topics are all over the place, which does also help us have more impact. And we even talk about fantastic looking spiders. Videos have been an exceptional way for us to step outside of the radio box. We additionally talk about our videos on the radio program in a lot of instances to help move our traditional radio audience into an online setting where they can continue the conversation. The next thing I'm going to talk about is seizing learning moments. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but one of our approaches has basically been to take advantage of public moments where people are talking about science or talking about something where they may not even perceive science, but we know it's there. So art, history, music, cultural moments. If the public is talking about something, we not only should be there, but we need to be there to answer questions, to distill misinformation, to kind of make sure that people are seeing the relevancy of what is being talked about. And in a lot of ways, we've actually had some content go viral, like the what color is this dress that was started a number of years ago with the Kardashians. We wrote an article about the science about that, and that went viral and actually continues to be a very popular article for us. I do want to share this one clip with you, which was after the coverage we did of Cassini last year.
In fact, Cassini hit home for a lot of folks, like Rosalie, who called in.
Hi, I'm Rosalie, and I'm 8 years old, and I live in Benicia, PA, and my favorite science moment was the final moments of Cassini. I was really happy to watch it on my mom's laptop while I got ready for school, and I want to become a scientist when I grow up, and I was just so amazed. It was just so amazing to see the final moments of a real space drone circling and orbiting Saturn, my favorite planet. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Okay, thank you for calling, Rosalie. I mean,
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, come on, right? That's pretty fantastic. I was like, I have to sneak this in one way or another. And also, you just never know who's listening. So try to make your content, no matter what, approachable to lots of audiences. So one of the greatest moments that we had this last year as a country for talking about science was the Great American Eclipse. This was hugely popular for Science Friday and was an invaluable way to kind of reach people with science across the country and connect them as a community around scientific subjects. Science Friday used this as an opportunity to talk with our audience, to find out what it was that they wanted to learn about, the questions that they had, and basically empower them to go out and be ambassadors for science and use solar science as an opportunity to do that. So it actually turned out to be some of the most popular content that we had for the year. We had 2 articles that were generated by audience inquiry that went viral and helped people kind of learn more about the solar science that is happening not just now, but throughout the year. It's really important, it's critical to Science Friday that we actually make all of our content understandable and valuable to audiences outside of certain geographic areas. So all of our content was made so that it was suitable to an audience regardless of whether or not they had eclipse viewability.
It just did it.
this is what it
Just
looks
did
like.
it.
It did it?
Really? Just did it.
Where? Oh, I see it! It's right there! It's right there!
Funny.
Wow!
Oh, it's
It's
almost
incredibly
Neat.
tiny.
It's really cute.
How is that working?
One of the ways in which we did this, you can see a lot of different things here, was we created a multimedia package, which Science Friday is known for. So that is gathering audio, video, actual activities that people can do at home, and a bunch of other things that they can put on our site in one navigable place where they can continue to learn and deepen their engagement. Actually, people spent over 23 minutes on our Eclipse pages alone, so that tells you that they were definitely deeply engaged. The other opportunities that we have had are bringing science to the public through events. Our events are incredibly popular. We can no longer keep up with the requests, and are a great way to build community and shareability through peer-to-peer communication. So we stay with the values of Science Friday. We are always centering our events around media. We are making sure that they are fact-based and that we are bringing scientists in direct contact with the public. We're now reaching over 10,000 people with public events throughout the country, paying attention to communities that might not always be reached. Social content has been immensely powerful for Science Friday. As I mentioned earlier, we have over 2 million people on social and the largest public following of any radio program, or other way around. Anyway, what you're seeing here is content that has been repurposed specifically for social sharing. So that allows us to engage our community all throughout the week and during the live radio program and other times during the week, where we can actually connect them with scientists and make sure that the dialogue that they're having is effective in terms of teaching them new things. One of our more successful campaigns socially is actually being studied was around cephalopods. Science Friday had developed a lot of content around cephalopods, and our brilliant social producer created something called Cephalopod Week, in which he basically took all of that content and created a celebration of all things tentacled. While it started at Science Friday, it is now an international phenomenon and is being studied as a way to engage audiences online. Like that, we are creating digital first media. This is an example called AHA, which is a video series with instructional videos that are all short and meant to be shared with kind of how-to activities for parents and people to take home with them. The interesting thing about this is that we made it to be digital first and consumable by an online audience. We are, within its first publication, we reached over 650,000 views. And on top of that, when we asked the audience to describe who they were kind of an unreached audience for science engagement, which was women between 25 and 45. Our educational content has been very powerful and is our fastest growing program. As I said, it reaches over 1.2 million people a week. Simply put, it is taking our existing media and assigning basically educational activities to it, which has been a really incredible way for us to reach educators, a new community that's kind of been untapped for Science Friday. And we're now, hopefully through teachers and through those educators, reaching a new audience of young science enthusiasts and preparing them to be science advocates going forward. This was a collaboration that we did with the Reynolds Journalism Institute, and it was related to science facts. So one of the things that is important for Science Friday, as for a number of the institutions that we have all been talking about here today, is correcting misinformation. This was a collaboration that we did with the Reynolds Journalism Institute to basically take some very basic science concepts that had been misconstrued or were misunderstood publicly and give them some very basic talking points so that our audience could go out and they could actually have effective conversations and dialogue around these certain things. We did this for climate change, vaccines, and a number of other more sensitive topics.
You look at hundreds of thousands of children who did or didn't get MMR vaccine to see whether the incidence of autism is greater than the vaccinated group. That's been done by 14 different groups of investigators on 3 different continents, and the answers have been very clear and consistent and reproducible. So we can say with comfort that MMR vaccine does not cause autism.
So, as I said, these were sensitive in nature, so we definitely did not just get positive feedback in terms of the topics. I am happy to say that we were never once reported as fake news. But what we did was we provided succinct talking points for how people could have some of these more sensitive conversations, and the content did exceptionally well and reached new audiences, and I hope provided people with enough information to go out and change some minds of peers. one of the next things I'm going to talk to you about is something that I'm particularly proud of, which is our effort to basically listen to what is meaningful and relevant to our audience. It's an important part of Science Friday's approach, and I think last year what we all saw as a country was a lot of communities that basically felt that they had been systematically overlooked as far as news goes and as far as the national agenda went. So what we did was we sat down at Science Friday and we all talked about how we could be more effective in using our media to reach those communities and make sure that they were a part of the national voice. So this is a partnership that we have with local public radio stations across the country to basically take their local science stories and put them on our national platform to give a platform to local stories that might otherwise never be heard.
This is KERA
For WWNO,
St. Louis Public Radio,
Iowa
News.
Public Radio News.
Not only does this dramatically increase the visibility of some stories that I think could be overlooked, but it allows us to strengthen the public radio model, right? So it allows us to work with local stations to enhance their media and give it more visibility, enhance our media through partnership, which is an important part of everything that we do. But it also reinforces the science reporting happening at these local stations because oftentimes they have few resources and are pulled in lots of different directions. It's my favorite example of Science Friday listening to what is important and relevant to our audience and creating media that is particularly meaningful to them. And finally, what I'm going to leave you with is new voices. So it only took 27 years, but Science Friday took our first venture beyond the Science Friday program in reaching new audiences and having more impact with audio. The result is Undiscovered, which is a podcast about the backstories of science. So we took what was a Science Friday property and value, and we are still interviewing scientists and we are still communicating about the news. But what we are doing here is this is a narrative podcast, so it is very heavily produced. It is hosted by two young, bright female journalists, and they are talking about the research that is happening outside of the published paper. So not the paper, because that's what we are talking about on air at Science Friday. This is talking about the process that happens that nobody ever talks about, the thing that makes science so wonderful.
I'm Ella. And I'm Annie. And you're listening to Undiscovered, a podcast about the backstories of science. So Ella, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I found as a science reporter, I'm always hearing about these jobs that I never thought could be a job that someone could have.
Right, and then you immediately want that job.
And I immediately want that job. Mm-hmm. And that was my first thought when I met Nina.
My name is Nina Lanza, and I'm a staff scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I work on a spaceship with lasers on Mars.
Nina works on NASA's Curiosity Mars rover. So it turns out Curiosity has a laser on its head, and Nina's job is to shoot this laser at rocks on Mars to figure out what they're made of.
You should download it if you haven't already. It has been immensely popular. So with season 1 of Undiscovered, we reached over 100,000 people straight out of the gate. With season 2, we are looking at between 200 and 250,000. And we're kind of just getting started. If you remember back to one of my earlier slides, that audience competes with Science Friday's podcast audience. So it's pretty impressive. What is more interesting about this is the fact that Undiscovered is reaching a different audience for public radio. So over 71% of the people listening to this podcast reported being under 40, which was pretty remarkable. But more than that, it's an equal gender distribution, so 50-50 across the board. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is some of the things I think have made Science Friday a leading voice in dialogue and conversation around science. So more than that, it's allowed us to maintain a reputation of trust with all of our stakeholders in the process. So we have very high editorial standards. We make sure we are carefully selecting our guests, we are fact-checking everything, and we are doing pre-interviews to make sure the stories told on air are ones that are understandable and meaningful to our audience. We're always providing sources. We've talked about this a few times here today. People want more information, and it builds trustworthiness. What Science Friday does is it provides links to all of its papers, it provides bios for all of its guests, and it allows people the opportunity to dig deeper. As I said earlier, an open dialogue is an essential part of making science accessible. Science Friday has conversations with scientists on air, always puts them in opportunities where they can speak directly with the public. Correcting misinformation and avoiding false equivalence is also an important part of being a journalism institute and an important part of Science Friday. So as you saw with Science Facts, Science Friday is always maintaining awareness for correcting misinformation and answering questions as they're coming in for our audience. Which brings me to listening. A lot of Science Friday content is driven by questions being asked by our audience. And it's an important part of taking calls on the live radio program. That is not an easy thing to do, but we want to make sure that we are listening to what is important to people and answering their questions directly. Evaluating successes. Oh, man, everybody should know this. It is essential. After every single one of our events, after every single one of our broadcasts, after every single one of our pieces of media is published, we are evaluating what made it great or what made it fail and how we can do better next time. If you are not taking a look at how you can do better, you're not going to get better. And finally, diversity in storytelling is essential. A number of people have touched on that today. It is not just important, it is a responsibility. Science Friday, for a number of years now, has had a commitment to 50, and has met this commitment, 50-50 guests, 50-50 gender distribution with male and female guests on the radio program. It is not something we ever thought about. It was just something we felt needed to happen. We did it, we never announced it, and our audience can hear it. And we get regular mail from people saying that they can hear that we have chosen to put women on the air and they love it, and it makes science more accessible to them. We have similarly made a commitment to having people of color on the program. If our audience and the public cannot find science in their everyday life, and part of this is done through the diversity of your storytelling, they won't be able to get it in the long run. And that's all. Thank you.